Well, good afternoon, friends from all over the country. A little bit later on the East Coast, of course, than it is on the West Coast. So I'm in my lunch hour, and Gerwin is way beyond lunch at this point. So from wherever you are in the country, welcome into this next webinar by the Global Immersion Project called "Different Doesn't Mean Dangerous." And so this is feels like a really pertinent conversation for us right now in the time that we find ourselves in, of course, in the wake of a couple more mass shootings, and just obviously in a space and time where it doesn't feel like we know how to talk to one another anymore. And so our hope is that this conversation gives us some practical tools to begin to bridge the divides between us and people who are not like us, whatever that means for you. And so my name is Jared Swigart. I'm the co-founding director of the Global Immersion Project. And we use webinars like these to have meaningful conversations about the work of peacemaking. And of course, peacemaking is not something that we think is just for the professional humanitarians. It's for all of us. We all have to grow in our capacity to see others, to see our commonalities, to see our humanity and dignity, to actually move toward folks, to get to immerse into their lives, to get proximate to with them, and then begin to build the relationships where we begin to remake the world. And so every webinar for us is an opportunity to have another conversation about how we can join together and remake in the world in ways that are profound and lasting. And so if this is your first time to one of our webinars, welcome. If you're a repeat webinar participant, welcome back. I want to orient us really quickly to Zoom and to the setting. If you'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a comment section, and this is a place for all of us to connect with one another. And so I want to invite you right now, wherever you're at, to utilize that comment section. Would you put your name and the city that you're viewing in from? It'd be really fun to see where all of us are from. And then you'll also see a Q&A feature there. The Q&A feature is, we really want to reserve that to honest questions that you have. And so save the comment section for thoughts and ideas and interacting with one another, and let's utilize the Q&A section for that space where we're really going to list out, here's the question that just popped for me because of the conversation that we're having. So get oriented to those couple of spaces. The way that we're going to facilitate this particular webinar is different than we've ever done before. We're actually going to view the clip that the National Sikh Campaign put together, which is hysterical and so important. And the reason we're going to show it is because the conversation is going to pour out of that clip. And so we'll view that clip, and then Gurwin and I are really going to have a conversation about it from an evangelical perspective, from a Sikh perspective, from a human perspective, and we're gonna unpack it together. And so that's the way we're going to go. We're going to try to address your questions throughout the conversation, and then if there's some space at the end, we'll do the same. And so both Gurwin and I are going to keep an eye on that Q&A. So feel free to populate that as you will. Gurwin and I met actually at the White House. Gurwin was a part of, if not the initiator of, a national campaign called Know Your Neighbor, and it was a campaign designed to help us think about how our faith is not to be armed in a way that helps us to divide and separate from one another, but our faith can actually propel us to be in relationship with one another. And we live, all of us, in neighborhoods, and we have neighbors who while maybe their origins or their creeds are different than ours, like, what does it mean to actually be in relationship with one another was one of the driving questions of the Know Your Neighbor campaign. And so I met him at the launch of that campaign at the White House. We became fast friends, and since that time have just been in the process of wondering about how it is that we as human beings can give our lives to remaking the world, and building the kinds of uncommon friendships that cause broken things to get fixed on the planet. How do we leverage our faith as the fuel that drives us toward one another and toward the divine together? And so I want to introduce to you Gurwin. And Gurwin, if you would just say, offer some introductory remarks about yourself and about the National Sikh Campaign and what you're up to right now, and then we'll dive right into this clip.
Yeah, absolutely. So first I want to apologize to everybody because I'm kind of sitting in the dark. It doesn't get any brighter in this room than this, unfortunately. But yeah, so the National Sikh Campaign is a campaign to help people understand the values and contributions of the Sikh American community. So Sikhs, we're the 5th largest religion in the world. We're the 3rd largest monotheistic religion in the world, but we're the least understood faith in the United States. And we believe in gender equality, racial equality, and religious tolerance. And we truly, at the core of our faith, believe that all people are created equal. And most people would not assume that if they see me, or they just from focus group after focus group, people do not get that impression when they see Sikhs. And we thought it would be important to set that record, which is why we started this campaign, and in large part why we did this video.
Right on. And before we view the video, Gurwin, how are you most commonly misunderstood, do you think? Like when you walk into a place, what, based on the case studies that you've done, how are people perceiving you, and what have you learned about that?
Yes, we have a lot of data on that, actually. So the way people perceive me is, because I have a beard and a turban, a lot of people think I'm a religious extremist, that I will stay to myself, that I'm either a Muslim or a Hindu, and obviously those are all false. So the reason why Sikhs have a turban, wear turbans and have beards, are to actually signal their commitment to justice for all people and to fight for the equality of all people. And I won't belabor this or go into all the details because it'll get us off track a little bit, but the reason why Sikhs started wearing turbans was a while ago, many years ago, it was only reserved for the highest class people in India. And because the Sikh community believed that all people were created equal and we're trying to undo the caste system, we believe that all people, even the lowest class person in society, should be able to wear a turban, because people shouldn't be, their lives shouldn't be destined from where they're born. So Sikhs wear turbans to represent equality and to signal to other people, particularly at that time in Indian society, that that person will fight for the rights of everyone's faith, everyone's caste, everyone's, whether it be male or female.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. Like I was just in a park with my kiddos a week ago, and even with this conversation on mind, and with the video, the knowledge of the video as well. And there were 2 Sikh gentlemen sitting on a bench, in quiet meditation with one another. And then the moment that their meditation was done, they were immediately in conversation with my 2 sons and I. And it was awesome to watch the turban as a symbol of inclusiveness and equality, and we're in this life together. To watch that actually be be embodied by them in the park in that moment, was profound. So let's go to the clip. Let's go to this video. And friends, as you're viewing this video, we're gonna give us just 2 paragraphs on the video, without giving it all away, but give us a couple of clips, a couple ideas on why this video, and we'll watch it, then we'll talk about it.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, there's a strategic reason why we did this video. One was to reach people like my age, young people your age, and a lot of our efforts up to this point have been mostly on TV or grassroots events. And we, Jer and I, our generation, we live on our phones and we live on the computer. And we partnered with Funny or Die to do this because that's where we can reach them. And then just, the other reason was that it's Funny or Die. It's a fun project to do. You know what I mean? So it's like, there's that. And then the more serious one is that, we knew from all the research that we did that our message would resonate with people, and it would be effective at helping people understand who we were. This would be an effective medium, particularly after, President Obama many years ago, and every presidential candidate since has been going on there to get their message out. And then lastly, there was a lot of things, and we'll get into this after the clip, about contemporary diversity discussions that I personally had a lot of commentary on. And I wanted to put it through, and I think the best way to comment on it was through comedy. And this became a platform for that. And I'm sure we'll dive into that after we see the clip.
Great. All right, let's roll the clip. Sit back and enjoy, friends.
So when we get overwhelmed, we just remember
our differences make us stronger and beautiful and
wonderful.
So powerful. Does anyone feel like sharing their experiences with diversity in the workplace? How about you, Hoppy?
What? No, that's fine. That's okay.
Oh, no, please.
No, that's fine.
I would love to hear.
It's okay.
Please.
That's fine.
Absolutely not.
Okay, well, my name is Harpreet, but most people call me Happy.
No. As a cis, mostly hetero, white woman, it is my responsibility to recognize non-Anglo-Germanic names. What would your family call you?
My family calls me Happy.
And I deeply apologize.
I mean, thank you. You don't have to do that, but...
So, Happy, I imagine your experiences with diversity probably revolve mostly around your...
My turban?
We can say it, that word.
Turban.
And that, okay, so that word...
Turban.
We can say that.
Yeah, totally. That's what it's called. It actually represents how we stand up against injustice.
Wow, amazing. That's probably part of your tradition, and that particular one is,
I'm Sikh.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. You know what, I think I am too. There's something going around.
No. I mean, that's the religion, the Sikh faith. So it started in India. It's actually the 5th largest religion in the world.
Oh my God. Well, not my God, your God, or gods.
That's cool. You know, we believe in one God, but we respect the beliefs of everybody. Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Jewish, well, except Scientology. I'm kidding, we accept them too.
Oh. So, yes, and you know what? Privilege, hello, check please. Table for me.
Yeah.
Can women be Sikhs too?
Okay, Carla, the answer to that is... yes, they can.
Yeah, I'm a Sikh, and gender and racial equality are core values of our religion.
Okay, wow, but you don't have the, you know,
Say it. It's fine.
I really don't want to say it.
You got it?
Turban.
Well, many Sikh women don't wear turbans, but that doesn't change my faith.
I'm sorry, everyone. As someone who goes to yoga once a week, I should know better.
Don't beat yourself up
And
about
you know what?
it. I mean,
That turban is pretty cool. Maybe I should start rocking one.
Or you could just come to the Gurdwara, the Sikh temple, on Sunday for service, and you don't have to be Sikh, and you can get free food.
Yes, I love chicken tikka masala.
it's actually all vegetarian.
Okay, well, I think that's about it, unless anyone else has anything they want to share.
Actually, I'm Baha'i, so...
Wow, yes, and that is important, and we should get into that after lunch. So everyone feel free to, and I'll just Google Baha'i.
Playing Beach Boys.
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Gerwin, there were three major ahas for me as I was viewing this this clip, and I want to just kind of throw them out, and then let's explore them one at a time. And the first one is this: like it feels like with regard to diverse conversations, or like bridging our differences, or seeing what's what's uncommon, or whatever it is. It seems like it's in vogue, or it's in fad to celebrate our differences, but we have no idea how to do that.
Right.
That's number one. But then number two, it seems like there's this hyper emphasis on our differences. And it seems like there's some work that we need to be doing before the celebration of differences around our commonalities. And
right.
Like, what is it that we hold in common? So even in the clip, there's like, she's learning real time about the differences, our diversity, but actually there was probably there's a lot of similarity between them that she didn't even know what to do with.
Right. Absolutely.
Talk to us a little bit about this like celebration of difference and diversity, yet how do we actually figure out what we hold in common, and how do we leverage that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that before I even get into the tactics, I'll get into why we framed it like this. So the reason why we chose this style of like trying to pick somebody that's a little bit too woke is I felt like in our diversity discussions were exactly as you said. They're getting too focused on our differences. We were not focused on our commonalities. It was becoming too quick to call people out and not call people in and call people up. to the values that we all espouse to or all want to see. And I just thought we were missing the mark, like particularly after all the great work we had done with the White House and what we had seen, what we did a whole campaign, national campaign in 2017, and got a little data back in terms of what was effective in diversity engagements, and calling people out and putting them down and making them feel awkward for not knowing things was just not the way to go. And pretending that you knew stuff was not the way to go either, right? And I think there needed to be a space that needed to be a little bit more open, a little bit more, more of a space for learning. And a space for learning really just means a place to make mistakes, earnest mistakes, right? And because you can't really learn anything without making mistakes. Like I've never seen that happen, right? And I wanted to comment on this dynamic because it started becoming comical. And it was more comical like on the internet than I saw in real life. I feel like post 2016 real life kind of continued, and like internet culture became its own thing. It seeped a little bit into the real world, but like, yeah, that was the purpose of doing like that. And I think like now to answer your question directly in terms of like, how do we see each other as human beings first before we celebrate all of our differences is, I mean, I think you just have to recognize that, like, look at another person and say, like, you have to be able to open up your frame of mind of how you relate. Like if I see another sick person, I know that we have a common culture of being sick. But oftentimes, just like even when I'm sitting in a subway, like I live in New York, I see the subway ride is as diverse as it can get, right? And I easily look across the subway and be like, all these people, like my brothers and sisters, we're all humans together, right? And that, to me, being able to change your frame of your tribe, of like having this human tribe, this greater human tribe, it sounds a little like hokey, and it sounds very like aspirational, but that's really how you got to look at it, right? Like that is how I got to look at Jared and be like, Jared and I were both human beings, right? And that by its own fact it gives us a common culture and a lot of commonality.
Totally. And I think I'm curious about where, like, the genesis of tribalism, though, because like I wish that we lived in a world where we looked at one another and said, we're human. That means we automatically have more in common than we have different than one another. And if we automatically have more in common, there's more to leverage in terms of how we're doing good in the world than, getting in disagreements about this or that. I'm recognizing, like, from an evangelical perspective, I think a major deficiency within our tradition is that while in the life and teachings of Jesus, the celebration of one's humanity is at the epicenter of it. This understanding that we're beloved, every human being is a beloved image bearer of the divine. Everything starts there.
Right.
For whatever reason, within evangelicalism, there is this. It feels like there's a disbelief that could possibly be true. It feels like there's this. The way that evangelicals read the scriptures, there's this exclusivism that says that anything outside of us is a contaminant at the very least, or could disqualify us from the family at the very worst. And so, like, I think what that's done for us is it lit for evangelicals. I'm just talking about like contemporary evangelicalism. That kind of like we've walked away from the life and teachings of Jesus, because in the life and teachings of Jesus, he hung out with all of the people.
Right.
As a matter of fact, he prioritized moving toward impacted communities and away from the people who were more in privilege. While he loved people in privilege,
right,
well, mostly by telling them the truth, he would walk away from them to move toward those who were the outcasts or the impacted or the marginalized.
Right.
So if that's the life and teachings of Jesus, that's what our tradition is supposed to be oriented around. Today, like in our tradition and the way that we're showing up on the planet, I think we live with this understanding that different actually means dangerous, that our differences aren't to be celebrated. They're to be avoided because they could contaminate our faith or they could disqualify us. So we become really proficient at identifying differences and then justifying why we stay away from you, rather than looking for our shared humanity. So we're good at seeing difference, and then we wall ourselves in so that you can't get to us. Which obviously it makes us blind to the fact that first and foremost, we're human beings. And I think that we would probably share this idea that we're human beings made in the image of the divine. You know what I'm saying?
Yep. No, totally. I mean, I agree with everything you just said. I think that's right. I mean, I think that this is a fundamental human problem as well, right? Because you see this across all communities all around the world. And it's a very difficult problem to solve, clearly, because, Jesus said this 2,000 some odd years ago. His Sikh faith had said this 500 some odd years ago. And, obviously it's a very difficult thing to implement. But I think it's true. And I think that to some extent, it's such a huge goal that it's like disbelief, like it feels like it's impossible to achieve it. And thus it doesn't feel like we should even try. But I really disagree with that notion. Like, I think that, it may not even be achievable in our lifetime. But I think having that aspiration has inspired people for thousands of years. And, just look at the United States. I could say this, having been a formal federal employee, having worked in foreign policy. A lot of countries looked up to the United States because we had a credible commitment to those same values, right? That over time, we had a commitment to our founding documents that said all men are created equal, and we slowly made moves to make those words a reality. And that commitment in some ways outstripped our economic power and our military power. And, those values have worked tremendously well for our country. And although they're very, very difficult to overcome, very difficult to overcome the tribalism they're talking about. And in some cases, because it's so difficult to overcome, we just want to revel in this, in the tribalism that we're talking about, to resisting it and living the values that you're talking about. That, you even mentioned that, this is the foundation of what the Christian faith is. It's the right thing to do, not only from a moral perspective, but it has had tangible benefits, and as citizens of the United States, we've been experiencing them.
Yeah, totally. How would you, like, if it's true that we hold more in common than we are different from one another, what would you say to a community of people that is terrified to even consider that we hold anything in common? What would you say to a community of people who has walled itself off, whether it's evangelicals? I mean, I think every tradition or every tribe does this in its own kind of way. How do we break out of the prisons of fear that we've actually built up around us, that are limiting our ability to actually have these kinds of conversations or be in these kinds of friendships? Because I'm asking because I don't know that we can educate people out of these prisons. I think we have to live people out of these prisons. And I'm wondering how would we do that from your point of view?
I actually think it's the way you just said it, actually. So one of my good friends, his name's Arno McAllis. Arno was a hardcore neo-Nazi and a white supremacist. And, I asked him, Arno, how did you give up this lifestyle, right? How did you go from being essentially a neo-Nazi? And this guy was a true neo-Nazi. Like, he was organizing, he raised money, he was in a neo-Nazi band, and like he was a part of the movement. Like went to camps and stuff. And this is before like the era that we're in, where it's a little bit more resurgent. Like he was in it when it was like the most outrageous thing to be a part of, right? Just so. And I talked to him. How were you able to come out of this? And he used to work. He used to tell me he used to work at a print shop, and he would wear, when he went to the print shop, he'd wear a jacket that had swastika on it. And his boss, who was Jewish, he did it to try to trigger his boss. He just would still be nice to him, would still be kind to him. And if he had an African American customer, and some days he wore the jacket, some days he didn't, the African American customer would be nice to them, or he would strike up a nice conversation with them. And he realized like he just was getting daily feedback that the worldview that he had was just false. And he said the kindness that he received from people that he viewed as other, just slowly, just it was like death by 1,000 cuts. Yeah. Right? Like that ideology slowly faded away because it at some point the evidence is so overbearing that he was just wrong. Right? And then he slowly changed his life. And I think that's how it is. And I think the important lesson in that is for someone that's trying to help somebody along in that process is that it takes time. Like I think we are so accustomed to getting information like that, to moving and making decisions so quickly, that in systems and things that take time, that we just don't even have the patience for them anymore. And there is no algorithm that is going to make humans change their nature faster, right? It's just not going to exist. So we have to be able to be urgent in the work of doing this, but also be able to deploy patience in a macro sense to see results.
No, I'm there's a couple things I want to kick around with you on that. Like one, and this is like to like the classic global immersion audience that's listening in right now. This is the reason we don't lead with the question, what must we do? We lead with the question, who must we become?
I think that's brilliant, by the way.
Thanks. I think it's something that we're learning over time. I think if you would have talked to us about it 6 years ago, we were probably more of the hyperactivistic, like, come on, like we live with the same urgency. I think we're asking a better question right now. Because if you think about the Jewish boss and the Black customer and the story that you just told, yes, there are strategies that they are employing. Absolutely. I would love to have them on the screen to talk to them about the real-time decisions that they had to make to continue to look that guy in the eye.
Yep.
Choose gentleness over critique, or whatever the strategies, but there's something about their internal working. I'm talking about the Jewish boss and the Black customer. I can only imagine that let them actually choose the better strategy, the restorative strategy, the strategy that actually reminded the neo-Nazi gentleman of his own humanity.
Right.
And so so I guess what I'm saying is, in this world, I think we're so quick to look for like the quick tools that I can apply to do a thing and or to change somebody's mind, or what's the right words that I can say. And the bottom line is we have to do the hard work of the internal tilling to become the kinds of people that can absorb another person's intentional disdain or hatred, absorb it, and not reflect hatred back, but actually reflect back the essence of our faith, which is a courageous, generous, compassionate, passionate, love-based approach. Like you can, whatever you're going to bring to me, I'm going to absorb it, and I'm going to push back actual love to you because I need you to remember that you're a beloved image bearer.
Yes.
So it's not like, not only will it take time.
1,000% over what you just said. Yes.
Yeah. So not only will it take time to change that person's mind, it takes time for me to become that kind of person. And that's not flashy, and that doesn't happen on social media. That happens in the stillness and the quiet of the everyday moments of our lives, right? It's a decision, right?
No, I 100% agree. So one conscious decision we made in that video because of that is we did not want the Sikh characters to put down the woman that was making mistakes, right? Because I think like that is I actually shared it with some of my friends, and they're like, well, this isn't realistic because normally like the Sikh characters would normally have gotten like really bad, right? And I'm like, I don't think so. Like there are people that can do what you just said, and I don't think we should. And I think people are just getting that impression because social media has told us that's how we should react. And I think that is absolutely false. I think we need to react with exactly how you articulated, Jared.
Mm-hmm. And that said, like, I'm also not advocating that for us just to absorb another person's unhealth, like
Right.
absorbing and then be like a teddy bear back to them. I think that sometimes loving people is to actually expose to them a little bit about the truth of, like.
No, I'm with you on that.
You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're gonna, you can't, let's be adult human beings for a moment, and like you actually can't say those types of things,
right?
And expect us to be able to move forward. So I think there is a truth and love type of thing as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder, who must we become in order to absorb the unhealth and reflect back love in a way that exposes to them their belovedness, to them humanity, and that seems to be the question in the world that we live in.
I know it's but I mean, how, I think the question is like, I guess you're asking me is like, how do you become that person? I mean, I don't know if even I'm that person, but I've seen examples of people doing it. And I'll give you another example of a former white supremacist, because like there's another guy that I know, I don't know him that well, but I had a very long conversation with him, and the Washington Post did a huge profile on this kid. So this kid was a leader in the white supremacist movement. He was like on radio, like white supremacist radio, and like did all this stuff, and like was writing articles, and he was like the wonder boy of white supremacy for a long time. And he went to college, and he was very like didn't want to go because he thought it was like just like this, going to college was this like liberal thing that you do if you're a liberal, and didn't have any friends right away, so he started going to Shabbat dinners because that was the only place like that was like inviting to everybody, because no one wanted to hang out with him. And he went to a Shabbat dinner, and there was people of all kinds, and they're being kind to him, and they were patient with him. And I think the question is, like, I think you asked the absolute right question is, how do you become those kids that help them along?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that is the ultimate question. That is the better question than almost like making a list of tactics.
Yeah. Right.
I think when that is your intention, the tactics will over time manifest themselves.
That's right. So for me personally, I mean, growing up with culturally evangelical roots, and in a hyper white society, there was very little people of color. There was I grew up in a dairy farming community in Wisconsin. Like I wasn't in touch with injustice. I wasn't in touch with the systemic oppression. I wasn't in touch with these things. For me to actually begin a process of formation and becoming, I had to dare to believe that my perspective was not 20/20 vision.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like, and if my perspective was not 20/20 vision, there's a bigger, broader understanding of the world and of people than what I had been told about them. And the only way that I was going to get the only way I was going to, my sight was going to be healed is if I actually got proximate to those people.
Right.
And I began to learn from them rather than about them.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? And so I think one of the things I'm struggling with, and speak into this, Gerwin, is that we all have somewhere deep inside of us this wonder about whether or not my perspective is 20/20 vision. Even those of us who seem to be most convinced that my very rigid and small perspective is 20/20 vision. is there this wondering that rumbles inside of us, all of us? And if so, how do we feed that in people such that it demands that they go and they begin to move toward people who are unlike them?
I mean, I think I don't have a better answer than what you just said. I mean, I think that's how you do it. I mean, you can read about something all day, and I'm a student right now, and I think about this all the time. I'm like, I could read about artificial intelligence all day, right? I could read about blockchain all day, but I won't really get it until I get my hands dirty.
You're in it, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just what it is. It's like, I don't think there's a better way to describe it than what you already said.
Mm-hmm. And I would suggest then that there are more resources available for us to take the first steps in the direction toward others. I'm fascinated by the public or the community board at coffee shops. Do you know?
Yeah.
Like there are pre-designed, programmed things happening in our cities that actually move us in the direction of people who are different than us from a creedal, an origins, an orientation, an socioeconomic perspective.
Yeah.
They're all there. The question
Right.
is, will we dare to accept the invitation, move the space in our calendar, and actually go sit in the back of the room and listen long and allow ourselves to be changed by what we've heard?
Right. No, that's
Will we
right.
make the time?
That's right. And I think, when I moved back home from the White House and I went back home to Cleveland, that I started organizing my community there. And that was the most pressing question, right? Because all these tools are available to us in a lot of places. All these means of connecting are available to us. And the question is and that's a question that even though I'm involved in this work all the time, I have to ask myself, right? Because we get so busy, and like everyone's doing a million things and taking care of their families, and sometimes we don't engage our own community that's right in front of us.
That's right.
So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the answer to that because I struggle with that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I think it's a good point.
I want to figure out how we can celebrate people's desire to move toward others, to build uncommon friendships, to bridge the divides. I want to figure out what it means to affirm that, but I also want to be someone who personally challenges myself and challenges others to actually do the work. Like what you aspire for doesn't mean anything if you're not willing to take practical steps in that direction.
Right.
And I think it starts with simply accepting the public invitations that are being offered to us in all of our cities.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm with you on that. No, I'm with you on that. I'm totally with you on that. Do you want to, while we're talking, open it up to questions as well on the chat?
Yeah, I'm watching. If you've got questions, if stuff's popping for you, friends, throw it into the Q&A, because if you know me, I have a million questions all the time. So, and I could fill a lot of space. So throw some in there. I'm watching it. It's live, and we'll take them as you pop them in. While that's happening, Gurdwara, I want to switch gears a little bit to the second big aha for me. Obviously, the room was filled with the people in the circle were more non-dominant culture folk. The person doing the facilitating was a dominant culture woman. I love how I'm a cisgender, mostly heterosexual. Like the script that you built for this is absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So really well done. But of course, I'm sitting there going, okay, I'm a dominant culture male facilitator. I stand in front of rooms. I sit in circles. I could identify with her. And what I noticed in her is that she was literally stumbling all over herself to be culturally relevant, culturally intelligent, politically correct.
Right.
And made it really uncomfortable for everybody in the room. Most notably that time when she's working on saying turban and you watch the entire room like exhale when she actually says it, right?
Yep.
So like we live in this moment where it's in style to be culturally intelligent.
Right.
But it seems like, especially for dominant culture folk who want to be culturally intelligent, but don't know how to do the work to become that. Again, you don't just read a book and become culturally intelligent. work. It's who you become. And if
Right.
you don't do the work, all you're doing is memorizing a script and a whole bunch of words.
Right.
You know? And then you're stumbling all over yourself. And so,
Right.
talk to us a little bit about her character. What were you trying to communicate with her? What were you trying to say to us through her character?
Yeah, that's a great question. So interestingly, she actually wrote the script with me.
Oh, she did?
Yeah. She's extremely talented. Script writing and acting.
She's brilliant.
Yeah, I was like, Tyler, I want you to be super famous. But anyway, so what we're trying to communicate through her character was that her character was like really afraid to be called out and wanted to also display like you said, a cultural intelligence. And I think someone's put in the chat, and I think that's exactly what we were trying to show, was that right now we don't have a safe environment to basically have these discussions that's authentic, and that allow for learning, and that often then that leads to like hyper wordsmithing, as things Sharon had said, and like it doesn't allow us to learn anything. Like, we're kind of hiding behind terms. There's this sense of overly formal. There's this sense you can't make an error. And I think it kind of cuts both ways. Like, I think, as people of color, or anybody really, it doesn't have to be people of color. Like, I'm a person of color. I cannot express to know everything about everyone's culture. We have to, as humans, have to give people space, learn about our culture, and to ask questions that seem silly and might be offensive but they might be coming from a good place. Do you know what I mean? And I think you have to be able to, on both sides, have to have that sense of just space to create a safe environment for learning. And through her character, we were trying to show that space kind of doesn't exist right now. And again, what I was trying to make sure not to do is to make sure that the Sikh characters didn't call her out for not knowing stuff, and actually invited her to the Gurdwara, right? So I was very keen on doing that. And then the other thing, just I'll give you a story. Like, I think the situation has gotten so rough for people that are in your shoes or from the dominant culture. Like, I was just walking down the street. It was my last few days in DC. Walking down Georgetown, and a man stopped me, just walked randomly actually, just stopped me. He's like, "That's a very nice turban, but why do you wear it on your head?" And I could tell, I had this sense that he was being very earnest about the question, right? And I just told him, it just shows my commitment to equality, blah, 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 right? And then he just grabbed my hand very quickly. As an older gentleman, and said, "Thank you, and thank you for not being mad at me." Because I think he was waiting for me to be offended, right? And what happened was, I could sense that he was being earnest. He came away with learning something. And that was ultimately what I would have wanted in that situation anyway. Do you know what I mean?
I do. I mean, and what I think that interaction calls for two things. It calls for the courage of that guy to be curious, and maybe it even felt like a risk for him to say the word turban,
Right.
assuming he hasn't seen the clip.
Right.
So there's the courage that he had to simply pause the moment and ask the question. And there was your ability to actually think generously about him.
Right.
In the moment, right? Like, you allowed your life to be interrupted by the question. You thought generously of him enough to think, I think he's coming from an earnest place, And so like those things, like, we have to create spaces where we are courageously curious people.
Yes.
B, we are always creating space where you can feel free not to be all put together around me. Like,
right.
feel free to ask the right question the wrong way. I think it gets really precarious in like, we know we're supposed to be in diverse settings and be sitting in circles like that and whatever. But to Sharon's point, very rarely are those spaces intended in a way where I can be like the white guy who literally doesn't know the answer to this question. And
Right.
I'm probably going to say the wrong word.
Right.
And it's okay in the room.
Yes. Totally. I think people are afraid, and I think that was what I was trying to get at, is that because we're not creating this space for learning, no one's learning anything, and they're just learning phrases.
Yeah.
And they're learning how to navigate a conversation that should be a little bit more open.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Yes.
I think, particularly, I'm from Cleveland. I just spent the last few years in Cleveland, now I'm in New York. But like when I was in Cleveland, there's a lot of people that, literally do not even have the cultural, they're in cultural know-how because they're just not in those environments, or maybe they didn't go to college where this is a little bit more prevalent, to be able to use the precise words to navigate those conversations. And all you can really go off of when they're speaking is their earnestness or their intent, right? Because they don't know how, because we have this whole vernacular now about how to have these diversity discussions that quite frankly come from a place of privilege.
Yeah, right.
And are often used in privileged environments, right? And if I spent a lot of time with people that worked in warehouses and factories, and those guys don't know. They don't know how to they wouldn't know how to navigate that type of conversation in that precise. They know how to navigate topics of the conversation, but they may not know how to navigate the phraseology that is so more prevalent online and in these spaces. So I think it's like what you said is we have to be able to create that space.
Yeah. And again,
we're also not going to ultimately get to the place where we want to be.
Totally. And all we're gonna be doing then is navigating conversations about difference and diversity, rather than actually entering in developing authentic and demanding our own transformation. 100%. Right. And so that's the thing that I'm trying to work through, as whether the person has a different skin color, represents a different creed or sexual orientation or whatever it is. How do I enter into every encounter intent on being the one who is learning, the one who is undone, the one who is being remade?
Yes.
I'm not interested in walking through this life navigating conversations.
Yes.
I'm interested in becoming a more holistic, generous, courageous, loving individual. And it's going to demand that we enter in, we are creating these spaces first of curiosity, like I have a lot to learn, and generosity. I'm going to be able to absorb, because if that guy from the warehouse says that word, am I going to immediately write him off as racist or something?
Right. No, 100%. Yeah.
There are a couple of really good questions, and I think Sharon, I think Sharon's question, then Raphael, we'll get to yours here in a second as well. But talking about how she lives, Sharon's talking about how she lives in a rural community in Indiana. Shout out to Mayor Peter. I'm not sure what that means, but Mayor Peter, this is your shout out.
Yep. Mayor Pete, yeah.
Was an amazing mayor. So the question is really around, I live in a small rural space. I travel and I'm interacting with diversity. But how do I get people in my small rural space to begin to move toward people of different religions or ethnic backgrounds, or to start to care about some of these bigger things that are happening in the world? Gerwin, how would you interact with that?
That's a good question. Interestingly, South Bend was on our very, very short list to run our campaign that we ran in 2017. And in some ways, I so regret that we didn't do it there, because it was so much closer to me than where we actually did it at Fresno. So I actually have a little bit of a soft spot for South Bend for how many times I've been there. This is a tough question. I think some of what you're doing is, because when you're not physically close to things, everything becomes more difficult, right? And I think one of those ways of doing it is doing what you're doing right now, is doing a webinar, right? Because the internet can make, me and you, Sharon, are very far from each other. I'm in New York, you're in South Bend, but we're having a conversation, and I think doing stuff like that is useful. I do know that there are certain constituencies in South Bend that can be, fairly diverse. I know there's a fairly solid Sikh community there. I think there's a fairly large African American community there. But yes, could you do it to the extent of someone in New York? Probably not, or in even Cleveland for that matter, probably not. But I think doing the things that you're doing, like doing this webinar, I think maybe having to search a little bit further away from your exact spot might be the way to do it.
And
That's a good question.
It is a good question, and I didn't see South Bend, so now I know who you're talking about with regard to Mayor Peter.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's awesome. I also like resonate with. I mean, growing up in a small rural space, I think the misconception is everybody in a small rural space is exactly the same, and
Yes, 100%.
I think that's a massive misconception, and
Yes.
and
Huge.
I'm literally curious about what does it mean to bridge the divides within rural spaces, right?
Yep.
Like I grew up in a village of probably 6,000 people, and everybody was all up in each other's business all the time. And like the divides between the Catholics and the evangelicals, or the economic elites and the people who were just scraping by, more the blue collar folk. Like there are all sorts of divides that are happening. And so I don't think that people showing up to like the bigger, more grandiose issues of injustice is an indication of how enlightened or that these issues matter more. I think we actually have to pay attention to what's happening in our own space. And
1,000%. 1,000%.
What does it mean to be
navigating those differences is not fundamentally different in the many cases. I mean, some cases it is, but it's not fundamentally different than navigating a difference of another kind, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be skin color or like a totally different religion. It could just be Catholics and Protestants.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I would figure out different ways that you can convene people who have different perspectives on a given thing.
Yeah.
And what does it mean to use your table, Sharon? Use your table to convene people who have a different perspective on the elections, a different perspective on immigration, a different perspective on the use of government dollars in your city, a different perspective on the books that are allowed or disallowed in your kids' libraries or whatever it is, and figure out actually attend that space where we can go, there's actually a shared value that is burning inside all of us that is expressing itself differently. How do we come to some understanding? And so I would encourage you to think about that in your own space. And then we can have a next conversation then on how we actually bridge the divides between rural and urban in our country, which is a whole nother conversation that requires millions of dollars probably. Raphael asks, having the courage to reach out and love the other tribe sometimes leads to blowback from members of your own tribe. What are your thoughts on dealing with that issue? That's huge. Go for it.
Yes. Okay. So this is something that has happened to me many times, all the time, actually. Particularly happened after 2017 when we launched the We Are Sikh campaign and started reaching out to millions of people. So I'll give you a little bit of context. So we launched the campaign. It was in 2017. The feelings of the election were still very, very raw. And there were many people in my community that were like, why are you talking to white folks, basically? And first of all, my initial reaction to that is just so against anything that we believe in. Like the fact that you even framed it like that or said it like that, that was my initial thought. But the second thought is like, how did I deal with that? I reminded them of those values that sparked me in the first place. I said, look, you're telling me, right, that I am trying to carry favor to white folks, which some people said in our community, and like, look, in order to protect like our own community and our own values. And I'm like, well, what are you protecting? What values are you protecting? Because let me remind you of what our values are. Right? Like, let's talk about the founder of our own faith. I just reminded him, like, look at what he did in his own life. He interacted with people that were, in some cases, despicable, right? To talk to them and even gave them the benefit of the doubt in their own humanity. People that completely disagreed with him, or people even wanted to see him to go away, right? But he kept, the founder of Faith Gurdwara kept reminding people that we are all equal. Mm-hmm. And he didn't get bogged down by the criticism of his own people telling him of getting out that message. So to some extent, you know what, I was like, I know what we're doing is right. I have the courage of conviction of what is the truth. And I know my history. And that gave us a strong conviction to continue moving forward.
Yeah.
And That is exactly what we did. And we also had the benefit of having a lot of data to show what we were going to do is going to be effective. So we marched confidently forward. So I think what I would say to Raphael is you should have the strong conviction as an American, as a human, that reaching out to other people is the right thing to do, no matter what people within your own community say. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure you can change their mind. Maybe you will through the results that you get. Mm-hmm. But I think the way you deal with it inside is just knowing that you have the conviction of being right.
Yeah. And I would just tag on to that as well, to Raphael. Like, for me, blowback isn't like, I'm not going to just dismiss blowback. I'm going to, while that's really like, I want to immediately dismiss it because it makes me defensive, but like that when I'm centered and healthy, I'm going to interrogate the blowback and ask, what's the truth in this? And I'm also going to understand that, and forgive me if this sounds laissez-faire or arrogant, but like, I think that we see in the life of Jesus that he got a lot of blowback from his own tribe. And so I'm wondering if that's not kind of what comes with the territory. And there are just folk, for me, and maybe this is a boundary thing, I think this gets to some of what Michael is asking as well in his question, is like, there's some boundary stuff that I think we have to establish around us. There are some internal practices. And so for me, my daily contemplative work orients around three questions: whose am I, who am I, and what's mine to do today? And so again, whose am I, who am I, and what's mine to do today? And that's helpful. I have community around me where I'm able to process these things real time. I have community around me that when I do receive massive blowback, I'm able to actually bring that to them and say, hey, where's the truth in this? What do I do with the pain that it's caused me? And how do I effectively let it bounce off and move out into the atmosphere, right? And not affect me the way that it could. And so I think blowback is to be expected, not to be avoided, because if we're trying to avoid blowback, we're not going to say the things that I think need to be said here. Hey, Gerwin, are you still with us here?
I'm still with you. I don't know why my video. Okay. I'm going to stop it and put it back up.
Okay. We're 2 minutes over. We want to go just maybe a couple of more minutes here, because Gerwin, look at Marielle's look at her question. I think it's really profound. She's asking, how do we balance the tension between wanting people to learn and grow beyond their blinders and hateful ideology, but also not letting hateful or closed-minded people hold our society hostage in a way that perpetuates injustice? So,
yeah, like, it's a great question. I think about this all the time. There's no easy answer to it, but I'll try to answer it quickly. And by no means do I think I have the answer to this, but it's something I do think about. And I think this is a question between what we see in our day-to-day life and what's happening in politics, because the only way can an entire ideology completely take hold over an entire society is if it has a lot of political power. And I think the way that you do that is you have to be in your activism, be able to, and there's going to be a lot of exceptions to this, so I'm speaking very broadly, in your activism, you have to be, which is much longer term than politics, you have to be able to show that type of patience. I think when it comes to politics, because politics can change far rapidly than just social movements generally, and a lot of things that can happen with people, you have to be active in politics, because there is an ideology that's out there that could run rampant if we do not get engaged and don't vote and don't talk to our neighbors about who our elected officials are. Mm-hmm. So I think, through our social work, I think for most cases, we need to display a lot of the patience that we talked about, me and Jared talked about. But I think when it comes to politics and making sure that this doesn't become all over the place, is that we have to have an extreme level of urgency.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would just take on to that. Like, for me, I read that at a very micro level. And the question that comes up for me is, does another person's hatred hold me hostage?
That's a good question. That's a good point.
Like, if it's holding me hostage, then there's work to be done. Why is it holding me hostage? Why am I allowing it to have that kind of power over me? And as a movement builder and an organizer, I'm always thinking about how am I contributing to a ever-growing constellation of people who refuse to be held hostage by hatred and racism and supremacy. Because to Gerwin's stories earlier, if we become a movement of everyday peacemakers who refuse to be held hostage and who humanize even when we're being dehumanized, I think the world actually begins to change. I think we disarm people's hatred in that moment, right? And if I refuse to be held hostage, then that means that in the midst of the moment, this is interacting with you a little bit, Michael, and your question, in the midst of the moment, the hatred, the racism, the things are actually boiling out of people. My pulse isn't quickening. I'm not finding myself defensive. I'm actually finding myself more curious to try to crawl inside that person's world and understand, why are they so angry? You know?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Yeah.
Yeah, at the root of racists or white is like deep-seated fear, terrible pain, you know, and this or that. And so again, the question, if we're going to think about it from who are we becoming, what do we have to do to, in the moments, take the 10 breaths, make sure that our pulse is clicking, and ensure that we're more interested in the relationship than in being right. And sometimes it's not going to be a snide remark or a quick comeback. Sometimes it's just going to be a gentle question. And sometimes the gentle question actually begins to disarm the moment. And so, friends, awesome questions. I'm not even sure if we were able to answer them exactly how you were hoping them to be answered, but thank you for asking them, because I think it kicked up a bunch more stuff here for us. So the last thing I want to give, Gerwin, I want to give you kind of the last word here of the content, then I want to offer a couple of what to do next prompts. But Gerwin, what I'm so grateful for in what you guys did with this film is you used satire. And you didn't take yourself so seriously. You know, you used satire, and it was effective. It was disarming, and I'm just wondering, you know, like, in the use of satire, you created an atmosphere of invitation. You created an opportunity for people you invited us into Sikhism in a unique way. And we talk a lot about taking the initiative to immerse humbly and with curiosity, but there's also something about being invitational and allowing people to actually immerse into our stories too. And so can you just talk really briefly on the use of satire as a powerful tool for peacemaking and disarming some of this animosity?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, look, I love politics. I love it so much. And I found myself in the last few years just being completely exhausted by it. And our conversation being so tense and so serious all the time, exhausted. And again, you're looking at someone that I thought there was no bottom for my love of just being in, like, issue-based and political work. And I was just like, I just think the best way to have these types of conversations right now, given how serious we are all the time, given how much toxicity there is in this atmosphere, is to just do it in a way that's funny, and, like, in a way that can make people laugh, and in a way that, like, we're not taking everything so seriously all the time. Do you know what I mean? And I just thought that would cut across in this atmosphere that we have so much better than just, like, making this super serious video or a super serious ad about, like, our different, like, I just don't think that would hit right now. Like, right now, I open my phone and I'm already just like, oh God, oh my God, like, so many serious things are happening. Like, I have found myself, again, someone that dedicatedly would read the news nonstop all day, hoping that they see a good cat video or dog video that can just take my brain away from the craziness. Do you know what I mean? And I wanted to bring that cute dog video or cat video to the world, but also have a message to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you've done it effectively, and pass along all of our praise to the entire team that put that thing together, because it was magical. And that's, I think satire, humor, not taking ourselves so seriously you evidenced that it's invitational. And we're in a moment in time, I think, where we have to figure out what it means to be invitational with one another. Like, I'm not gonna defend my story or defend my tradition. I'm actually more genuinely interested in yours, in learning about yours, and in learning, perhaps that becomes mutually reciprocal, and all of a sudden we find ourselves learning from one another, and probably laughing at some of the absurdity of the way that our traditions show up.
Yeah.
On the planet, you know. So Gurdwara, thank you so much for
you
what
guys.
you're doing with the National Sikh Campaign, with this video in particular. We pray it on and hope that it opens up all sorts of other dialogues. To the those of you who are listening in, you're going to receive an email with access to the recording of this conversation, as well as a toolkit that will be designed around conversation and personal reflection, as well as some practices that maybe emerged in this conversation that you could embark on as you continue to become an everyday peacemaker, and someone who embodies some of the best of what we've been talking about here throughout our time. The last thing that I'll say, though, is that no doubt you've spent now an hour and 11 minutes with us. At least one thing has risen to the surface for you. There's at least one takeaway. There was that one idea or that one statement or that one practice or that one story that struck something deep inside of you. I want to encourage you that the moment this webinar concludes, write that down. And then I also want to encourage you to write down the name of one or two other people that you'd want to have a conversation with about that very thing. And so if this is just another webinar that has taken up an hour of our lives, I'm not sure it's as effective as it could be if we took seriously that key learning and then engaged in a conversation with another person about it. And so encourage you to do that the moment this concludes. Watch for that email, and then we've got a whole bunch of other exciting conversations and equipping conversations coming up throughout the fall. So blessings, friends.
Yep.
Thanks for the time.
Thank you, Jer. And I want to thank everybody that attended as well.
Right on.
Yeah.
Awesome. Have a good day, friends.